Now, before we get into today's show, you've probably got a business, you've got a team, you've got a plan. And so why does it feel like you're the only one who actually cares about it moving forwards? Now, today's guest reckons he knows exactly why. And it has nothing to do with your market. It has nothing to do with your pricing. It has nothing to do with your people, believe it or not. It's got everything to do with what's happening or not happening, should we say, between your strategy and the day-to-day behavior of your business. Welcome to The Business Strategist, the show for CEOs and founders ready to scale fast, lead smarter, and build a business that doesn't rely on them. I'm Adam Strong, award-winning strategist, former elite athlete, international speaker, and 3 times best-selling author. After 3 decades in business, I know exactly what it takes to grow, scale, and exit with impact. Each week, I dive into real conversations with industry experts, bold entrepreneurs, and clients navigating the uphill struggles of business, giving you the tools and the strategies to create more profit, more freedom, and more impact. Let's get into it. Hey guys, I just wanted to take this opportunity to make you aware of a brand new tool that we've just created called the Exit Readiness Assessment. Now, it is for founders and CEOs that are looking to exit from their business operations. Now, it doesn't matter even if you're not looking to exit right now, I would highly recommend to go and take the assessment straight away. It helps you to identify areas in your business that you need to work on to help you towards that exit strategy. And at the end of it, you get a personalized report on some of the areas that you're doing particularly well in and some of the areas that you need to make some improvements to. Make sure you head over to readytoexit.scoreapp.com. That's readytoexit.scoreapp.com. Enjoy. Now, what's really interesting, so today's guest, we've got the amazing Kyle Hakima, who is a researcher, an executive leader, he's a professor, and he's also the author of Strategic Clarity. He spent 2 decades inside real businesses, figuring out why growth stalls, and the answers keep coming back to the same thing over and over again. It's not strategy, it's the behavior, ladies and gentlemen. Now, he's built a wonderful diagnostics tool called the Strategic Orientation Index, which we will talk about, of course. And without further ado, Kyle, welcome to the show.
Adam, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
What's really interesting about what we both do is we're both really passionate about strategy. But I think what's really fascinated me is about your extensive research in the whole kind of behavioral part of why things don't move forwards or in terms of the execution. Do you see what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. And honestly, that's why I went down that path is as a practitioner myself, I felt the pain. I felt the pain of setting great strategy and trying to move forward and wondering why the organization was struggling to gain traction. And that was really what precipitated this journey into researching and understanding, which turned into strategic clarity.
Love it. Love it. So just before we get started, for you guys, as I always say to you guys, make sure that you got a pen and a paper handy. We're going to be doing some deep dive here. So you do miss anything, what I would recommend, pause, go back, rewind, re-listen to it. You will pick up some new juicy value bombs as we walk along this path. So let's jump in because I'm excited about today. I talk to a lot of founders every week, and a lot of them are doing 6, 7, even 8-figure businesses, and they've all got a strategy. I think every business has got a strategy, right? So many of them are feeling like their business is running them instead of the other way around. Do you ever kind of get that? What have you found in terms of the research?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. I've sat, and this will probably resonate with the audience. I've sat in so many leadership offsites over the years where the energy is high in the room and the executive team has spent days refining the strategy. Your priorities feel clear. We've got this. We're aligned. This is the direction. And after a short period of time, the organization goes back to work. And then different functions start prioritizing different things. Like sales is maybe prioritizing responsiveness. Operations is prioritizing consistency. product wants innovation. What's fascinating is that if you ask each department, are you aligned with the strategy? They will all say yes. And that's the part I think that leaders underestimate is that your strategic drift doesn't start with rebellion. It starts with that interpretation. Everybody believes that they're reinforcing the strategy, but they're reinforcing different aspects through their own functional lens. And then you get fragmentation that compounds. And leadership or ownership starts asking, oh, why are we struggling to gain traction when the strategy seems so obvious, right? Why is this organization, to your point, running me instead of me running it? And I found that most strategies don't fail because the strategic plan was poorly designed. They fail because the organization is behaviorally drifting underneath that strategy. And that's why I say that strategy lives and dies in behavior.
Hmm. So when we're thinking about behavior, now I think of obviously the behaviors of the people running the business. Is that what you're referring to, right?
Yeah, everybody in the organization, not just the leaders, right? That's important, right? All the way down to frontline staff. Yep.
So, okay, so it's an interesting thought then. When you talk about everyone is in agreement, like, yeah, we've got this, we're all singing off the same hymn note. We're all going
Yeah.
towards this specific direction. We all know our roles within what we're supposed to be doing. And what you're saying is that there is a disconnect between what they should be doing and what they should be actually be doing. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. So I love that, Adam. And I think this happens inside of a lot of organizations, right? Because the leadership team is spending enormous amounts of time communicating, crafting the strategy, town halls, leadership updates, quarterly meetings, what have you. And eventually the leaders start feeling frustrated because they're like, we've said this 10 times already. But what I found is that communication and alignment are not the same thing. Communication is here's the strategy, alignment is how should behavior actually change because of this strategy? And that's what I always tell people that I work with, leaders specifically. If you articulate a strategy on Friday, but you don't tell them how their behavior needs to change Monday morning, you have a plan and not an executable strategy. And that can be very frustrating. Let me give you an example. Let's say an organization decides we're going to be really customer centric, really focused on the customer. Logical, sounds good conceptually. But what does that mean operationally? Does product management now validate features differently? Does operations respond differently to complaints? How does finance prioritize investments differently? And if you're larger, how does middle management reinforce different decision making behaviors? If those behavioral implications are never clarified, every department fills in the blanks themselves, and that's where that drift starts. One department interprets customer centricity as being super fast, another as high quality, another as customization. And none of those are irrational, but they're not behaviorally coherent. And if they're not coherent, then your execution gets fragmented and you start to stall.
So in terms of I mean, what you're talking about is cohesion, is what
Yeah,
I think we
yeah.
were talking about. So then, what would be the real distinction between someone that is just nodding their head for the sake of it, right, and someone that's either just doing that, and normally if you're a founder or a CEO and you've got experience and you just know that actually they don't know the answer, and sometimes it can come across as obvious. Sometimes it can be because they're not meeting certain KPIs, or it might also mean that there is an attitude problem,
Uh-huh.
right? What's the most common reasons for this misalignment? Like what you based on? I mean, there must be probably quite a few, I would have thought.
Yeah. So for leaders today, what I would, if they're listening, they are, I would resist the urge to immediately blame people. Instead, start looking for patterns, some things that you can ask yourself. What keeps getting relitigated or rediscussed in my organization? Another is what initiatives consistently lose momentum? Or which departments seem to interpret priorities differently? And that's where Again, not what are our goals, not what are our KPIs. Everybody knows those in their organization if you have a strategy, right? But how are decisions and behavior change operationalizing, right? Because if that behavior never changes, then your strategy eventually becomes, to your point, Adam, theater, where everybody's just nodding, right? And it becomes something that people think about, but they don't operationalize it because they either don't know how or they're getting mixed signals, perhaps from middle management, right? Or there could be a people issue where they are just maybe naturally more risk averse and they maybe had some bad experiences in a previous employer or something, right? So there is that potential as well. But an important point here, don't immediately jump to a new strategy. Right. I think what I found is most organizations do not need another strategy. They need better behavioral coherence around the strategy that they already have.
So then I guess my thought that came to my mind is, so if you've got, I don't know, CEO, managing director, whoever it might be, in terms of leadership qualities, because obviously you've got to be quite self-aware about this alignment that you're talking about. Because one thing that springs to my mind is if you're relatively new or you've been promoted in a higher ranked position, that's often a very difficult task to do if you're inexperienced. Would you agree?
Yeah,
So,
I would. Absolutely.
so I guess then my question would be is like, how do we as leaders become more aware of these patterns that you're referring to? What is it that we can train ourselves? Is there a practical exercise that we can do to improve our self-awareness of those patterns?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that question, Adam. I would say first, start by don't assume that agreement equals alignment. I've seen leadership teams leave meetings time and time again believing great, everybody's on the same page, everybody seems to have understood it. But then the executives or leaders go back to their department and reinforce slightly different assumptions. And that could be for a myriad of reasons. One example is maybe your processes are actually reinforcing behaviors that are counter to the strategy that you agreed upon, right? Maybe you're trying to be very fast and entrepreneurial, for example, but your policies are slowing you down because you have too many layers of approvals, or people feel like they have decision authority, but maybe as a leader, you've come down on them when they make a mistake. So therefore, they're drawn back because, wait a second, I thought I had the autonomy to make this decision, and now my leader's mad at me, right? So maybe you're sending conflicting signals, or your process may be reinforcing the wrong behavior.
Love that. Some good stuff. When in terms of like you've talked about this thing called misalignment, which is quite fascinating, really. From your perspective, I mean, you've been working in business for like 2 decades, and also with your work as a researcher, what are some of the earliest warning signs that said, you know what, these guys are completely off track? Or, is there specific red flags that we need to be looking for, or any friction that kind of says, do you know what? If we continue on this path, it's going to lead to this direction.
I
Is there
love that. Yeah, I love that question, Adam. And there are some patterns that recur. I'll give you several, right? Because I know your listeners are going to want to write them down. One is leadership churn. Do you have people that you think are great fits and all of a sudden they're leaving after a year or two? Another is stalled initiatives. So your projects start with incredible momentum. And then somehow 6 months later, they seem to never really gain traction. You may start to also see departmental friction between different departments. That typically manifests with functions that start blaming each other. And what I found a lot of times is that executives initially interpret those problems as people problems. They think, oh, well, sales and operations are just misaligned and it's Joe and it's Jim don't get along, right? But what I found is those are not usually isolated conflicts. They're symptoms of that deeper strategic inconsistency underneath the organization. Another warning sign is customer disconnect. Do your customers say, hey, we're upset. You used to understand us better. You used to really care about us, and we were not feeling that. Yet another would be competitors are moving faster than you, and you're becoming really reactive to what the competition is doing. And probably the biggest one, that's the biggest tell I would say, is repeated decision making. So leadership teams think that they have settled something 2 months ago, and now they're having the exact same debate over again. That usually means the organization has not operationally aligned around the strategic posture that you want as an owner or a founder.
I was actually having a great conversation with a friend of mine yesterday, and and it was like it was like the conversation that we were having. We just kind of just said to me, as what you had just said, is like, I just feel like I'm banging my head against the wall. It's just like not sinking in. But and then I just said to him, but sometimes what we also got to do is we've also got to take a look at the mirror in ourselves and take responsibility rather
Well,
than kind of being frustrated with people,
yeah.
because that's just not going to get anyone anywhere forward.
Right, right. And interesting, piggybacking off of that, Adam, is, you know, I'm not against all friction. Healthy friction is important in an organization, but
Agreed.
there's a difference between dysfunction and healthy friction. To me, healthy friction sounds like, let's pressure test this, or what risks might we be missing, or what would the customer say? Dysfunctional friction sounds like, why are we still debating this? Didn't we already decide this? Why is this department not on board with this? Why does every initiative start a fight? Right. And one thing I've seen repeatedly in organizations is where people stop taking initiative because they fear or they no longer trust that the decisions that are made in those meetings will actually hold. They get frustrated, right? Because it keeps bubbling up and it keeps bubbling up. That's when dysfunction really settles in. The organization becomes tired, right? People start to disengage or they leave, and your momentum slows, and it's really hard to get it back. And it makes it worse. It's a downward cycle because what typically happens is management compensates by over coordinating everything. When you start to slow down, more meetings, more approvals, more reporting, which slows execution even more, right? So healthy friction sharpens your strategy. Your dysfunctional friction tends to recycle unresolved conflict.
Fascinating question, because
Yeah.
something that sprung to my mind, which was we took, for extensive research on this, what we call this episode of misalignment.
Mhm.
How is that different from, say, cultural dysfunction? How do they differentiate?
That's a great question, Adam. And I get that one a lot. So I think how it's different than culture. So the answer is it's not culture, but culture is certainly part of the picture. When most people talk about culture, they're talking about things like values, engagement, morale, the workplace environment, right? What it's like to work at an organization. Those things matter deeply. What I became interested in was something more specific. I kept seeing organizations with good cultures that still struggled with execution. They had great people, strong values, talented teams, but your initiative stalled and your departments fought. So, what I realized is that culture alone wasn't explaining the behavior that I saw. So, strategic clarity and the strategic orientation index focuses specifically on strategic behavior. How does the organization think about opportunity and risk? How does it listen to customers, competitors, and its market? And how does it act operationally under pressure? Because two organizations can have healthy cultures and behave very differently strategically, right? So that's the distinction.
Very good. I love that.
Yeah.
One thing that sort of sprung to my mind, and I love the fact that we had this list of 6 to 7 kind of signs that you talked about, right? When is it that you took, and these signs are important, and I absolutely get it. And when is it that there's a business, when you're in business, for example, and you've got this misalignment as you described, when is it deemed as not their fault. So, for
Uh,
example, we'll take, say, the tech space or the law industry, right? There may be a shift in legislation, which then
sure.
creates red tape
Yeah.
and political bullshit, of course. But but is there any other examples that, that we got to think is that they're thinking, oh, do you know what, this is coming in place and it's really slowed us right down? Is there anything else that we need to kind of, how do we adapt in things like that?
That question, and you're absolutely right. So what one thing that I talk about in the book is it's not there is no ideal quadrant, right? So or ideal posture. It all has to be contextually fit. And the beauty of the framework is that you can pulse check your organization to see where your posture is at any given time. And what I say is it gives the organization a mirror for how it's behaving right now, but then also a map to say, well, maybe the ground has shifted beneath our feet legislatively. So we need to become more customer aware and less entrepreneurial as an organization. So this tool gives them the ability to say, okay, we need to pivot from where we were to where we are because the industry fit has changed, right? The context fit has changed.
How does alignment, how is it different from adaptability? Because what you're saying is, okay, well, if I'm aligned, then I get this result. If I'm not aligned, I'm going to get limited
Yep.
result. So
Yeah,
then how does adaptability and change in the market, how do those two correlate to each other?
sure. That's a really interesting question, Adam. And what I would postulate is that they are two sides of the same coin, right? So adaptability is the organization's ability to move, right? In a same direction, all the people on the boat rowing in the same direction. So that's what I was trying to solve because we need to be able to say, something changed. We need to now turn the boat around and start rowing the other direction. And that's where this tool and this work allows you to say, okay, everybody, we need to change maybe some processes or how we're executing these things to become more customer aware, right? Misalignment is different than adaptability or misalignment because misalignment is you're struggling because you're sending mixed signals, perhaps, or people are interpreting your strategy differently, as I had mentioned before, right? When we're saying we want to be more customer centric, but then everybody interprets that a little bit differently, right? And that goes back to, well, you're not, as a leadership team, not being explicit enough with how behavior needs to change.
Love it. Very good. So I know that in your new book, which is going to be coming out, I think is it June 16th? Is that right?
June 16th, yep.
June 16th, 2026, depending on when you're listening to this, guys. You've created a framework called, is it Strategic Orientation Index? Right?
Yes, sir. Yep.
Tell us a little bit more about what that framework is and how does it actually help leaders
Yeah, absolutely.
realign
Yeah,
if that's the goal.
love that. So, one of the things that I kept seeing in my work experience and then also in research is that leadership inside organizations believed there was a disconnect between how leadership believed the organization was behaving and how people actually experienced it at different levels. So, leadership might say, we're highly customer oriented. But then you start listening across departments and realize some functions may not engage with the customer insights at all. Or leadership believes we're entrepreneurial, we're agile, but employees experience the company as approval heavy or risk averse. So SOI helps make those invisible inconsistencies visible, right? So it helps the leaders understand how is our organization thinking about opportunity and risk, not just how we're saying how what we think about it, but how is it being experienced in the organization, and how are we listening to our customers and markets? How are we acting under pressure? And one nuance, Adam, that I want to draw out here. This is not about leadership micromanaging how functions do their job. That's not the point. Okay. The point is creating coherence around a strategic posture. And I'll give you an example. I recently worked with an organization that got classified as hybrid zone. And for those not familiar with the work, that means that different departments are operating from conflicting assumptions about the strategy. So in that case, we weren't telling engineering how to engineer their products or the product teams what needs to be on the roadmap. What we were saying is that organization said that customer responsiveness mattered strategically. So then customer validation needs to be a part of how decisions are getting made, including in the engineering team and in the product management team. So that's very different than task micromanagement. It's creating alignment about how the organization is thinking and listening and acting.
How does the SOI framework, how does it differentiate between other frameworks that are out there? Because I mean, listen,
Yeah,
if I read, there's probably a billion books on business strategy on Amazon and God knows what else.
yeah,
Like, how does it differ?
absolutely. Yeah, so I get that. I get that question a lot, right? How does this different from EOS or OKRs, right? And I think that those are all useful systems. So like balanced scorecard, OKRs, they all help the organizations create focus, priorities, accountability, operating rhythms. The question that I became interested in is why do some organizations still struggle even though they have those systems in place? And that's where I found that execution doesn't happen simply because priorities exist. I don't see SOI as competing with those systems. I see it operating at a slightly different level. Those tools help define what the organization wants to accomplish. SOI helps the leaders understand whether the organization's behavior is aligned to accomplish those goals, if that makes sense.
It does make sense.
Uh-huh.
Absolutely. As I mentioned to you, I have a lot of conversations with a lot of founders and business
Uh-huh.
leaders on a weekly basis. And I find that a lot of them are still stuck in the business rather than on it, right? And it's a classic micromanagement quality, of course.
Mhm.
They know their strategy inside and out. They can
Uh-huh.
talk about it all day. But the moment they start to step back from the operational part of it, the whole thing starts to wobble, if you want to call it that. Would you say, from your perspective, is that a strategy problem or is that a misalignment problem, should we say?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I would say it is a misalignment problem. So, and the reason I would say that is because if they're stepping away from operations,
Yeah.
that means that they're probably bringing in middle management, right? And the issue that many organizations have as they try to scale and they bring in that middle management is that's where the strategy stops being conceptual and starts becoming operational, right? So the executives or the ownership create the direction, the strategy. Your frontline employees execute said strategy, but middle managers determine what gets reinforced, what gets tolerated, what gets escalated, or what quietly disappears. And I think leaders often underestimate how much interpretation happens at that layer, right? So leadership is saying one thing, middle management is translating it into practical reality.
I think there's also it kind of reminds me of growing pains. Do you see
Oh,
what I mean?
absolutely. Hmm.
And and especially if you're quite inexperienced and your team's inexperienced or they've never gone through scale or whatever it might be, it's kind of like, oh, this is a new experience. I'm not sure
Yeah,
how to. Do you see my point? And I'm sure you've
yeah.
experienced that with a lot of clients that you work with.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've seen organizations where executives believe innovation is top priority for our organization, right? But then middle management quietly reinforces caution because, as I mentioned earlier, maybe there was operational mistakes and they were punished more than experimentation was rewarded. So that gets back to what I was saying earlier. Maybe you have either some behaviors from the top down or processes that are actually working counterculturally to what you want to be as an organization.
Now, one thing that I'm quite fascinated is this whole ideology of scaling, or
Mm,
or in another context, like why is it that some businesses struggle to, I suppose, keep up with momentum
Mm,
and as they scale, even when they have great people, they have a clear strategy. From your perspective, like why is it that you think that momentum really slows down and maybe they have to resort back to growth mode? I don't know.
yeah. Yeah. I love that question, Adam. And I would say early stage organizations move quickly because there's proximity, right? And that proximity to leadership, to ownership creates natural alignment.
Yeah.
Everybody is part of the same conversations. They see the founder's reaction firsthand. They understand the trade offs. Then growth happens and there's new departments, new leadership layers, approval systems. Now the strategy has to travel through much more organizational complexity. And I've seen this repeatedly as companies become heavier, right, as they scale. Decisions that used to maybe be one conversation now require 5 meetings. Or people have authority, but behaviorally, they're still waiting for permission, right, because of a bad experience. So that's what I would say to that.
Beautiful. Love that. Some good stuff. We are going to go into coaching mode very soon,
Yeah.
which I'm very excited about, of course.
Mm.
And one thing that I have become fascinated in my years of business strategy and running a business is this whole kind of concept of a lifestyle and a performance
Mhm.
based business, right? And I mean, you've heard of that concept. I think it's widely used in the US.
Absolutely. Mhm.
And I don't know, but I would love to have a conversation around this whole, and I've been in positions myself where, where I don't know if it's misalignment or it's a strategy problem. I'm just not sure.
Mhm.
But
Uh-huh.
I'd love to have a conversation around the comparisons between the two, and in
Sure.
terms of like not just the comparisons, but how can we use them as strategic advantages to be able
Yeah.
to, if we do want to move into, say, a performance based business,
Mhm.
what are the requirements to do so?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I think they're optimized for different things.
Yeah,
So
agreed,
a lifestyle business, I think, is often optimized for income, autonomy, and control.
agreed.
The owner is usually close enough to the work that he or she can correct any drift personally. Alignment still matters, but the business can run on founder instinct because there's so much proximity to the founder,
Yes,
right? A
agreed.
performance business is different. It's trying to scale. The leadership is trying to, move up in the organization and bring new revenue, expand into markets, improve enterprise value, and also build repeatable execution beyond that founder, beyond that proximity. So it becomes systems that you need to build. And as I mentioned earlier, when you start talking about building a performance business, in that strategy, you have to understand that your strategic direction is traveling through more and more layers of your organization, right? All of a sudden, you have sales, operations, finance, product, marketing. They're all having new leaders and maybe even middle management. They all have to interpret and execute that strategy consistently. And that's where it becomes problematic because the owner, the leader, the founder can only be in so many places at once.
That's true. That's very true. So then in terms of like, if we look at, say, a lifestyle business and say a performance based business, right? And we go back to your expertise, which is around misalignment, behavior, and strategy. In terms of like operationally, if we look at the way a lifestyle business operates compared to the way a performance based business operates, are there any differences in terms of like certain behaviors
Mhm.
within a set
Yeah.
organization
Yeah.
that
So
we need to
I
look
would
for?
say, yeah, I would say to that, Adam, let's pretend that you're the CEO of a lifestyle business. And the first question in coaching that I ask in that context is, can your organization execute your strategy without you in the room? That's something that makes a lot of founders kind of pause, and it's a good reflective question to think through.
Yeah, it's a good one actually. We actually have that as part of our own diagnostics, believe it or not.
I love
And
that.
it is one of the common questions because the diagnostics is based on helping the founder exit from the business. But
Mhm.
often or not, most of the time, most people put no.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then that snowballs into other questions. Well, no. Okay. Are you okay with that being no as the answer? Because to me, if the answer to that is yes, I'm okay with that not being the case, that defines that you're probably going to stay in the lifestyle lane. If the answer to that is no, they need to be able to operate, you're already seeding that you want a performance based business instead of a lifestyle business because you want to pull away from it.
That makes complete sense. Are there any I know that we're kind of coming towards the end of our conversation, but one of the things that I really love for our listeners is something for them to walk away with, some sort of practical exercise or a number of exercises that they can work with themselves or their teams. And they might really resonate with some of our conversations around, oh, you know what? I can see some of the flags or I can see some of the warning signs
Mhm.
with this misalignment. I'm in complete agreement with what you're saying. What can I do about it? Is there anything that springs to mind?
Yeah. I mean, I think in terms of what they can do about it, I would again say,
Apart from pick up the phone and call you, of course, because that's
well,
cheating.
I mean, sure, a shameless plug, they could always do that. But again, I would say, be careful of the knee jerk reaction. Don't immediately assume it's a people problem. Start looking for those patterns, right? What is getting relitigated, or what initiatives or what things that you're trying to do seem to be getting resistance? Because uh, misalignment leaves breadcrumbs all over your organization that if you're watching and you're carefully looking for them, you're going to get tipped off to, yep, I think we have a misalignment problem.
Hmm,
And
interesting.
that goes back to that list that I had shared earlier of what are
Yep,
some of those common things that tend to happen when there's misalignment.
beautiful. I
So
love that.
I would recommend anybody that's listening that they go back to that list and take a good, hard, introspective look on those things that we discussed. And if two or three of those are true, it may not be a people problem, it might be a misalignment problem.
Yep, 100%, love that. Tell us a little bit about more about your book, which is coming out, because I know it's coming out very soon, which we're all excited about. But I guess one of the questions that often comes up, is certainly in the back of my mind, is how is how is your book any different to any other strategic clarity book that's out on the market? I mean, apart from the fact that it endorsed by my good friend Marshall Goldsmith, by the way. So so big out to Marshall, of course, but I mean, it must be good if it's endorsed by Marshall. So tell us a
I
little more about that.
I certainly hope so. And the interesting thing is for me, it's a scholar practitioner take, right? So because I have walked in both lanes, right? I have spent the time, and where I kind of how I explain it is the practice gave me the pain, right? So I experienced this pain firsthand as a leader for the past over 2 decades, leading organizations, both entrepreneurial and mid market. And then the research gave me the language and the understanding. Once I started diving into the literature, something clicked. And I think that's why it's resonating with people like Marshall Goldsmith or whomever. I've been very, very fortunate to get some very nice endorsements. And I think it's because it's bridging that gap between all of this knowledge that's been accumulated in the scholarly archives. And my goal is how can I take that, distill it, and make it practical for people running organizations? And
Love it.
I think that's why it's different.
Very good. Love that. So, for you guys that are listening in, by the way, make sure you go check out Kyle's book. And also, Kyle has been very kind to offer there's a little gift down on the show description notes. So make sure you check out that free gift because there's only five that he's offering, which is a one-to-one conversation around your strategy. So that's a really, I would bite his hand off if I were you. I'm just kind of sharing that with you guys. But if you feel like you're not ready for that, that's okay. Make sure you go and follow Kyle over on places like LinkedIn, for example, and any other social media channels as well. First of all, Kyle, I just want to say thank you so much. It's been a great call today, hasn't it?
It certainly has, Adam. It's been wonderful. The energy was great. The questions were fantastic. Thank you for having me. It's truly a pleasure.
Super. So for you guys that are listening in, if this has been like, if it feels like it's been an intensive PhD, you're not wrong. Like I said, make sure that you pause this episode, go back, rewind, and listen again. I can guarantee you will pick up new things in our conversation. Anyway, from me and Kyle, thank you so much for listening in, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.